بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إخواني أخواتي، نرحب بكم في هذه الجلسة المسائية التي أردنا أن نركز من خلالها على نقطتين مهمتين، هو كيف ينظر العالم إلى التجربة التونسية، كيف يرى العالم ما يحصل في تونس والانتقال الديمقراطي في تونس وكيف يقيمونه، وأيضاً ما هو الدور المجتمع الدولي في دعم الانتقال الديمقراطي في تونس، كيف يمكن لحلفائنا وأصدقائنا وأشقائنا الدول الصديقة والشقيقة سواء كانت عربية أو إسلامية أو غربية، كيف يمكن لها أن تساعد تونس في هذه المرحلة الصعبة والحرجة لإنجاح الانتقال الديمقراطي. ولذلك يسعدنا ويشرفنا جدا أننا دعونا واستجاب إلى دعوتنا 5 سفراء ممثلين عن دول الكبرى: السيد فرنسوا سفير فرنسا، السيدة نجمة مالك سفيرة الهند، السيد أندر سفير ألمانيا، السيد هامش كووال سفير بريطانيا، والسيد منير تابت الممثل الدائم للأمم المتحدة في تونس. فأعتقد أن حقيقة أنها جلسة هامة جدا نريد أن نتعرف من خلالها على كيف ينظر العالم إلى التجربة التونسية وكيف يمكن أن نعمق هذا التعاون بين تونس وبين الدول الشقيقة والصديقة. إذن نبدأ بالترتيب حسب إذا ممكن. السيد فرنسوا سفير فرنسا، فليتفضل. وأعتذر لكم جميعا وخاصة للسادة السفراء على هذا التأخير في الوقت، وإن شاء الله نحاول نستعجل.
سيداتي سادتي، أود قبل كل شيء أن أقدم تحياتي إلى السيد رضوان المصمودي رئيس مركز الدراسات حول الإسلام والديمقراطية للدعوة التي وجهها لقصد المشاركة في هذه الندوة. إن الموضوع الذي يجمعنا اليوم هو في قلب مشاغلنا جميعاً: الدبلوماسيون المعتمدون بتونس، مناضلي وزعماء القوى السياسية والمجتمع المدني التونسي، ملاحظي التطورات السياسية في الشمال الأفريقية والشرق الأوسط، وأيضاً المواطنون العاديون. إن حضور كل واحد منكم في هذه القاعة له دليل على الأهمية التي يكتسيها الحوار وتبادل الأفكار لحسن فهم التطورات الجارية في تونس وفي محيطها الإقليمي. لن أتحدث هنا عن وضعية البلدان الأخرى في منطقة شمال أفريقيا أو الشرق الأوسط الغارقة في الاضطرابات منذ اندلاع أحداث الربيع العربي، لكن من البديهي أن نتائج وتحديات الانتقال الديمقراطي في تونس والطريقة التي يمكن للمجموعة الدولية أن ترافق من خلالها هذا الانتقال هي مواضيع تثير الانتباه فيما وراء الحدود التونسية. 3 سنوات أو أكثر بقليل منذ أن استعاد التونسيون التحكم في مصيرهم يمكنهم أن يفتخروا بما تم إنجازه. إن صرخة الاستغاثة التي أطلقها محمد البوعزيزي والنداء من أجل الحرية والكرامة والعدالة الاجتماعية قد دوى في كامل أرجاء البلاد ووصل صداه إلى ما وراء الحدود. 3 سنوات بعد ذلك تمت المصادقة على دستور الجمهورية التونسية الثانية، وأخذت حكومة كفاءات وحوار مستقلة زمام الأمور في البلاد مع رغبة طموحة في السير بها من هنا إلى آخر السنة إلى انتخابات حرة وغير منازع فيها. طبعاً يعلم الشعب التونسي أنه خلف كلمة الانتقال الديمقراطي تختفي عدة صعوبات وشكوك. الفرنسيون يدركون ذلك من خلال تاريخهم. إن الأمل الذي برز في جانفييه ثم خلال انتخابات أكتوبر 2011 قد ترك المجال أحياناً إلى الإحباط أو اللامبالاة. أين ذهبت مبادئ الثورة؟ كيف الحفاظ على مكتسباتها وروحها وأمالها؟ وحده الشعب التونسي يملك الإجابة دون تدخل ولا عدم اكتراث، sans ingérence ni indifférence. راهنت فرنسا مع شركائها الأوروبيين على نجاح معركة التونسيين من أجل الديمقراطية. أحيي هنا حضور زميلي البريطاني والألماني، كما أحيي كذلك وجود المندوب العام والدائم للأمم المتحدة في تونس. إن مصلحة التونسيين ومصلحتنا ليستا مختلفتان. تونس في سلام، تونس في ديمقراطية فخورة بقيمها وتنوعها. تونس تخلق نموذج التطور والعدالة الاجتماعية الخاص بها. تونس يمكن أن يتماشى فيها الإسلام مع الديمقراطية. في مناسبتين، في جويلية 2013 وفبراير 2014 أتى الرئيس فرنسوا هولند لتقديم رسالة تضامن وأخوة. فرنسا ليست صديقة حزب أو نظام، بل هي صديقة الشعب التونسي كما يفعل الأصدقاء، فهي تبتهج اليوم مع التونسيين بنجاحهم. إن أول هذه النجاحات المصادقة على الدستور يعكس تنوع وتطور وخصوصية تونس. لقد عبر رئيس الجمهورية الفرنسية يوم 7 فبراير في المجلس الوطني التأسيسي وأمام ممثلي الشعب التونسي عن إعجابه بالعمل الذي أنجزه. يكرس الدستور التونسي المبادئ الأساسية لازدهار مجتمع ديمقراطي متجذر في الحداثة: دولة قانون، الفصل بين السلط، المساواة بين الرجال والنساء، حرية الضمير. طبعاً يحق للتونسيين أن يحيوا هذه القيم والمؤسسات، وإلا ستظل حبراً على ورق. ولكن لا يتعلق الأمر فقط بكلمات، بل وأيضاً بإرساء أسس التعايش وباحترام قواعدها التي ضبطتها الدستور الجديد. لن يتحقق الانتعاش الاقتصادي أو الانتصار على الإرهاب وتنمية الجهات التي تمر بوضع صعب إلا من خلال قيام دولة واثقة بقوتها وخاصة بقانونها. في تونس الجديدة من المفروض أن يتمكن القضاة من البت في القضايا بكل استقلالية، وستتكلف محكمة الدستورية بضمان احترام الحريات الأساسية والتوازنات المؤسساتية. كما ستسهر هيئات تنظيم مستقلة على ضمان حرية الصحافة أو على تطبيق القوانين الانتخابية. أما المجموعات المحلية المنبثقة عن اللامركزية فهي مسؤولة عن إبلاغ صوت كل جهة. في تونس الجديدة يعتبر الإرهاب جريمة غير قابلة للتقادم، وتتصدر مستلزمات دولة القانون الإجراءات المتخذة من قبل السلطات العمومية في كل الأحوال. لقد أمكن تحقيق هذا النجاح بفضل روح المسؤولية لدى القوى السياسية التونسية المشاركة في الحوار الوطني. نتمنى أن تتواصل هذه العقلية إلى حين الانتخابات القادمة. بفضل الرباعي وبفضل روح المسؤولية لدى القوى السياسية التي قامت بالتنازلات الضرورية طوت تونس صفحة الأزمة السياسية. من هنا إلى آخر السنة سوف يعطي الناخبون التونسيون إلى البلاد المؤسسات التي هي بحاجة إليها لرفع التحديات التي تواجهها. توافق فرنسا كلياً على ورقة الطريق التي رسمها التونسيون. منذ سبتمبر عبرت علنية عن مساندة بلاد فرنسا للمبادرة التي أطلقها الرباعي. من وجهة نظرنا لم يكن هناك خيار آخر سوى حل يتفاوض فيه بين جميع القوى السياسية. نحن نؤمن بضرورة التوصل إلى حل وسط تاريخي بين الهويات السياسية التونسية. ماذا يعني هذا الحل الوسط التاريخي؟ لا يتعلق الأمر بتوافق بين الأصدقاء في الكواليس على حساب شفافية الاختيار الديمقراطي. ما يعنيه هو القبول المشترك لجميع القوى السياسية بحقهم العادل في احتلال مكانهم الحقيقي في اللعبة السياسية وفقاً للاختيار السياسي للشعب التونسي. لدينا اعتقاد راسخ بأن فكرة التعددية الديمقراطية هذه قد ترسخت بصلابة في ذهن التونسيين بفضل أزمة 2013 والحوار الوطني. نحن نبتهج بذلك أكثر من قبل. حان الوقت اليوم لكي تجسد انتخابات حرة وشفافة هذه العقلية بانتخاب مسؤولين سياسيين لهم كامل الصلاحيات لتطبيق الإصلاحات التي تحتاجها تونس من أجل دفع اقتصادها وتحقيق طموحات الشعب التونسي في العدالة الاجتماعية والتنمية. وأخيراً أود أن أذكر العبارة اللي استعملها رئيس الجمهورية الفرنسي فرنسوا هولاند في الخطاب الذي ألقاه يوم 7 فبراير في المجلس الوطني التأسيسي. أذكر بالتخصيص: تعود دائماً لكل أمة مهمة كتابة تاريخها، فالشعب التونسي هو الذي يقرر وحده مصيره. وشكراً.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. شكراً جزيلاً. الآن السيد هامش كووال سفير بريطانيا في تونس فليتفضل.
Ladies and gentlemen, chers collègues, it's never very easy to follow my dear friend François, خاصة لما هو يتكلم بالعربي. It's a very hard act to follow. So I will not even try, and I will speak in English. I'm delighted once again to be with the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy and to have the opportunity to discuss with you the role of the international community in supporting Tunisia. Before doing so, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Radwan Masmoudi and the team for all the work that they have done, the hard work that they have done, and the role that they have played in supporting Tunisia and its democratic transition. The last time I was with you, Dr. Radwan, it was to celebrate the approval of the Constitution on which Francois has just spoken so eloquently. It was a moment to congratulate everybody involved in that process on the hard work done to achieve it. Forgive me then if in addressing you today, today's theme, I also focus a little bit on the hard work still to do. Whether in my time here, I arrived last autumn, or following events in Tunisia from London, I've always believed that the success of Tunisia's transition will depend first and foremost on Tunisians as well, themselves. We, the international community, of course, have a very important role to play in supporting that, and I'll come to that in a second, but we're the supporting cast, and you are the leading actors. It's become a commonplace to say that Tunisia's progress in democratic transition is a model, but it's no less true for being that. And it's a particularly important model because of the way it was achieved. To steal the label from the products that you send to Britain, it was made in Tunisia. It was made in Tunisia through the national dialogue. It was greatly helped by civil society organizations such as CSID, by the political parties and their leaders. And it was above all achieved by dialogue, by compromise, and by consensus building. And that is why that capacity for dialogue makes Tunisia an example in North Africa and in the region. And Francois has just quoted his own president. I will also, if I may, Francois, quote your president, because I was very struck at the constitution ceremony when President Hollande rightly said that the international friends of Tunisia want Tunisia to be an example and not an exception. How can we help in that process? To answer that, we need to identify the challenges. You've already, I think, discussed these this morning and will no doubt want to discuss them with us. But if I may try and encapsulate them in three areas, I'd suggest they are obviously the economy, and in particular, how to match the progress made on the first revolutionary slogan, Horia, with progress and the work still to be achieved on the second, Karama. Secondly, security and the regional dimension, particularly given the potential effects or the knock-on effects in Tunisia of troubles elsewhere in the region, in particular the difficulties that Libya is facing. And thirdly, and let's not forget that in the afterglow of the constitutional success, is the hard work, the learning process that needs to be done in building up the democratic process, making sure the elections happen and happen well, and making most of the freedom while respecting it too. These are all changes on which the international community can help, and we as the UK are doing so. For various reasons, some of them good reasons, the UK wasn't a major actor in Tunisia in all these fields before the revolution. All that has changed enormously since 2011. We started our bilateral aid program in Tunisia. We now have 3 times the number of British diplomats in the embassy than we had 3 years ago. And we're working hard in all the challenges I've just mentioned, along with our friends in the international community. To take just one of them, democratic transition, we've had a bilateral program which is small, but we think very well formed, well targeted, focused on how we can help. CSID has been one beneficiary. There are many others, I won't list them here. But to give you one example, earlier this week in fact, I was attending an event, a women's event, about finding common ground, Ardiyya al-Mushtaraka, between secular and Islamist women's groups. I found it inspiring, and again, the result of dialogue between the groups, and another example of this Tunisian capacity for dialogue, which is most impressive. On security too, we all recognize the challenges. We are all developing our cooperation in different ways. We have had, just last week again, the second visit of the first British general to come to Tunisia for, we think, over 30 years. It's another example of how we are developing our cooperation. But I want to focus and conclude my remarks on the economy, because the economy is obviously crucial. We are all, as major shareholders in the international financial institutions, through the IMF, through the World Bank, and others, we are strong advocates of budgetary support for Tunisia. Like France and Germany, we are major contributors to the EU budget, and we are equally delighted to see agreement on significant macro-financial assistance from the EU. And we're likewise working through other organizations, including the G8, of which we had the presidency last year, and in which we made a 50 million contribution to the transition fund for this region. But there's one aspect of reform which is very much has to fall in the context of made in Tunisia, because such international support can only be sustainable if it helps relaunch investment and inclusive economic growth. At the end of the day, it is private investment which will be the main driver of that economic growth. We have a role to play in encouraging that. We had a big investment conference in London under our presidency of the G8 last year. We had the Lord Mayor of London coming to Tunisia this year, and I hope that will be an opportunity to develop links between the City of London and the financial sector here. But key to all of that will be economic, institutional and structural reforms, and that will need to be done in Tunisia and by Tunisians. The need for it predates the revolution, but they're very much needed now to attract foreign investors to Tunisia, to support local entrepreneurs, to reduce social inequalities, and to reduce the burden of the state budget on the taxpayer. But there is one way in which the international community, I think, can help in that respect. It's not as tangible as what we do through the international financial institutions, but it is no less important. And that is sharing our own experience of reforms, sharing the best practice that we have, learning from what we may have done. We are always in the process of reform. Reform never stops. And equally important, learning from what we might not have done so well. But I think there is a very important role for the international community in exchanging with you those experiences of reform. I think that they are very important in sustainable prosperity for Tunisia. None of them are easy, change never is, but I'm very encouraged by your government's commitment to build the foundations of a more prosperous and stable Tunisia through reforms. And it's a way in which we can help as the international community. And just to conclude, to echo Francois' remarks, there is a unity of purpose amongst your friends, your international friends, to help Tunisia succeed in its transition. We, like other international partners here today, and others, are committed to accompanying Tunisia on that journey of transition. To return to the label I mentioned, that journey will, like the Arab Spring itself, be first and foremost made in Tunisia, but I can assure you that we, as Friends of Tunisia, will help you make it too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And now with Mr. Munir Thabit, the representative of the United Nations in Tunisia, المندوب الدائم للأمم المتحدة في تونس. حاول بالله تقرب as much as possible.
السلام عليكم. السادة الكرام، سعادة السفراء، حين طلب مني زملائي في المكتب أن أتكلم في هذه الندوة، سألتهم عن اللغة التي مطلوب مني أن أتكلم بها، فأجابوني اللغة الإنجليزية. في المؤتمر القادم سأسأل رأي السفير الفرنسي لكي لا يكون عندي الجواب الأفضل، فأستميحكم عذراً وسأتكلم في اللغة الإنجليزية. Let me again, Dr. Masmoudi, thank you for your invitation for the cooperation on this particular event. I will make 3 observations. I'll make 3 challenges and 3 remarks about the support of the international community. The 3 observations are the tone of consensus and dialogue for reaching whatever solution the country required that was set at the very beginning of the transition with the power sharing agreement that was struck immediately after the first elections. Having three parties of three different political persuasions had the three topmost posts in the country, set the tone for consensus and dialogue. The second, despite the assassinations and the impasse and the difficult tension that existed in the summer and the fall of 2013, I think it is kudos to the National Constituent Assembly that it did not resume its work until it found a way to integrate those members of the National Constituent Assembly that had opted to stay outside of the game for a while. The third element is the innovative and unique arrangement that facilitated the mediation, and I speak, of course, of the quartet. It is not often that you see the trade unions, the business association, the human rights organization, and the bar association get together and facilitate a national political dialogue. This is an exception, a unique and an innovative solution. On the positive outcome, I think we're all recognizing that the constitution that emanated from the dialogue is one of the most progressive constitutions in the region. Most Tunisians would find their values reflected in this important social contract, if not fully, at least in great part. The Constitution does not only note marked progress on issues of human rights, equity, and balance between religion and the state, but perhaps the new elements of the Constitution is the creation of several institutions that, when they become operational and financially independent, can be a strong force in safeguarding democracy and consolidating democratic gains. I speak, of course, on the institutions on such pivotal issues as elections, human rights, good governance and anti-corruption, the Constitutional Court, the Audiovisual Communication, and the Sustainable Development Commission. The last element in this is, of course, what I think most of us are quite pleased about, is the absence or the relative absence of violence throughout the process. And where such violence existed, it was concentrated on only a very small few groups. The third element in these three observations, first observation, is the healthy political climate that kind of ensued. We now have an agreement among the political players on a modus operandi that is focused primarily on consensus building, on mediation, and on dialogue. The current environment of political competition that is hopefully and stays away from violence for the political campaign that is going to ensue on the elections issue. And last, which is an important element that I think does not get enough attention, is the role of the civil society in political debates on public issues. It's quite positive and encourages inclusion, which probably ought to continue. In practically every one of those dimensions, the UN has been present to support on elections, on the constitution, on transitional justice, on anti-corruption, on modernization of the security sector, including as well on job creation at the local level. And incidentally, since I have the floor, on the elections, dear ambassadors, we are short of a bit of resources. We would like to have your support to continue a program that continues to exist and supporting the EASY. So if any of you wishes to contribute, do let me know towards the end of this. The three challenges that remain is essentially the consolidation of democratic gains. This is a period of euphoria, that is true. and celebration of the achievements. But it is also a period of vulnerability. Those who are not interested in democracy may still threaten the gains. These democratic gains should quickly translate into political stability, into meaningful results that citizens can relate to, including such things as popularization of the Constitution. And the 5 institutions that I mentioned need to be translated into permanent actual realities as soon as possible, especially the transitional justice institution, which could again set a new standard for the region in terms of the transitional justice and transition in general. Perhaps the most important challenge that remains is the issue of inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economic growth. Without jobs, without creating a new economy that creates sufficient jobs to absorb the youth, the challenge will continue to be there. Citizens will appreciate the Constitution and the political gains, but they need to see transformation in their own lives. And I think that's perhaps the most important challenge. Social entrepreneurship, productivity, competitiveness, value added, engaging the youth are words that come to mind in meeting this challenge. Reducing inequities between the region is also an important challenge that cannot be addressed without keeping in mind the importance of creating jobs at the local level, additional types of planning models that are inclusive, especially that the idea of decentralization is now enshrined in the Constitution. On structural reforms, I think the ministers this morning spoke sufficiently. I will not go further into this. The last, perhaps, challenge is the question of assuring security across the country, especially on the borders between Libya and Tunisia, and on the borders with Algeria, and a need for some kind of a program to absorb back the fighters that are returning from Syria in a more social integration that would see for them a more positive role. I will conclude with 3 comments on possible support from the international community. I think now it is the time to increase this support and not to hold back. There is a feeling that, well, with a constitution behind us, a new government behind us, an election is coming on board, and perhaps Tunisia does not need any additional support. But it is really now the time to increase the support so that the vulnerability is taken away and resilience is maintained. I would also call on the international community, including ourselves, of course, to have a greater confidence in the capacity of Tunisians themselves to manage the remainder of the transition while at the same time advocating for longer-term reforms. They have managed in the past, they can certainly manage in the future, but we need to keep engaging them to obtain a longer-term vision and commitment to that vision. This showing confidence in the Tunisian does not stay at the political realm. It needs to translate itself into significant and serious investments and bringing back the tourists. In terms of lessons, it's clear that when there is a way, when there is a will, there is a way. Tunisians did find a way. And like my colleagues who preceded me, I cannot conclude without quoting a high-level leader. Francois will forgive me if I do not quote the French president, but instead I will quote the Secretary General of the United Nations when he says, there cannot be true democracy without equity and development, and there cannot be development without democracy. The Secretary General also called the Tunisian experience a model that should inspire other countries. We are doing our part as the UN, where we are documenting this experience with the idea of sharing it with other countries, more for inspiration and not necessarily a blueprint and a copy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thabit. I wanted to thank both the UK Embassy and the UN Development Programme for the extensive support that they have given to CSID for the past 2 years. And most of the activities that I mentioned in the morning about the dialogue about the Constitution and the classrooms and the workshops on democracy education have been funded through the UNDP and through the UK-Arab partnership. So we really thank you very much for your support, and we greatly appreciate it. Please give them hands of applause. Thank you. Now, Mr. the Ambassador of Germany, if you could please, or India, either way. India, okay. Thank you very much.
Dr. Radwan Masmoudi, Chairperson of the Ambassadors Forum, distinguished colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin by saying how useful and informative I found the CSID annual conference last year, and what good speakers you had. I've looked forward a great deal to the annual conference this year, so I really feel privileged to be a part of the Ambassadors Forum on the role of the international community in supporting Tunisia. The huge difference from last year to now, of course, is the extraordinary and historic achievement of the Tunisian people earlier this year in adopting their constitution through a process of debate and negotiation, resulting finally in a valuable, hard-won consensus within the democratically elected National Constituent Assembly. I can confidently say that witnessing the signing ceremony of the Constitution by the 3 presidents in the National Constituent Assembly will remain one of the most unforgettable and inspiring moments of my diplomatic career. It was particularly evocative for me as an Indian that the Tunisian Constitution was adopted on 27th January, one day after the day India celebrates the adoption of her own constitution on 26th January 1950. India fully supports the democratic transition in Tunisia. We salute the people and the leadership of Tunisia for the many firm steps you have taken on the thorny path towards a durable democracy. We know that it has not been easy to get thus far, as Tunisia has had to struggle with many problems, including religious radicalism and terrorism, and an economy in very difficult straits. Nevertheless, the people of this brave country have shown the region and the world that differing ideologies and schools of thought can coexist and work together through a difficult transition to achieve nationally recognized objectives of democracy and the rule of law. India sees a long-term future together with Tunisia. India can help with expertise in microfinance, capacity building, IT, and high-tech sectors over the long term. In the immediate future, we have offered our expertise to Tunisia in election management, and we are ready to help in any way that we can in this very vital sector. I wish to recall here the visit of our External Affairs Minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, to Tunisia in early February this year to salute the Tunisian people and government on their historic achievements. This was the first ever bilateral visit of our foreign minister to Tunisia in the independent history of our 2 countries. During his visit, he discussed cooperation in the sector of election management with the government of Tunisia. India has offered to Tunisia the gift of the full complement of electronic voting machines needed for conducting elections in Tunisia. These machines would be manufactured in India and would be worth about 5 million dinar. These are in use in India since more than 20 years and are cost-effective and nearly impossible to rig. But we understand that the Tunisian electorate is unfamiliar with electronic voting machines, as indeed are the voters of many countries. They are useful in India. As I was mentioning to someone the other day, when you have as many voters as you do in India, having ballot papers for each one of our voters would mean loss of a lot of forests. So I think it's good for everyone in the world that we use electronic voting machines, which are reusable. We will naturally defer to the priorities and preferences of Tunisian voters and Tunisia's easy in this matter. That's the, as many of you know, the Instance Supérieure Indépendante des Élections. We're interested to conduct a workshop in Tunisia with officials from our election commission later in the year on the voting machines and other issues related to election management. We have also offered to provide on-the-job training on the principles and practices of election management for 2 weeks to officials from EZ in New Delhi in April, that's next month, when our general elections will take place, with the largest electorate in the world of over 800 million voters. We are keen to welcome Mr. Mohammad Shafiq Sarsar, President of EZ, to visit India, to establish a collaborative relationship with the Election Commission of India. But we understand that this chapter of cooperation can begin only after the electoral law has been adopted by the National Constituent Assembly and after the juridical status and many other particulars of EZ have been established. And we will naturally await those events before taking forward this cooperation. In any event, we know Tunisia has successfully conducted free and fair elections in October 2011. So the collaborative relationship between the two authorities that we are trying to establish will aim to broaden existing horizons and to enhance the current expertise. We know that we will not be teaching, we are not seeking to teach anything new. There are important economic, political, and social challenges facing Tunisia currently. A word on the economic challenges. It is perfectly understandable that there may well be unintended consequences of a newly achieved democracy and freedom. Labor unrest and discontent can freely express themselves, and the natural result, a drop in production. Thus, Tunisia has witnessed plunging phosphate production. From an average production of 8 million tons of rock phosphate in the pre-revolution period, the production last year was only around 2.5, 2.6 million tons. In our view, every Tunisian has to realize that ultimately their salvation lies within them. Tunisia's great skills in engineering, its highly literate workforce, and its natural resources must be harnessed and made more productive than before to meet the revenue requirements of a country in transition. Since many years now, India is the largest buyer of Tunisian phosphate, and so naturally this drop in production has affected us sizably. And this is also a very important link between our two countries. It is a way in which Tunisia contributes to the food security of India, of which we are very, very proud, and it's important for us. I am confident that this realization is already there, and that the phosphate sector will see a revival, just like the tourism sector is seeing a recovery currently. Tunisia has already shown the world that it knows how to resolve significant political differences and differences in ideology through negotiation and compromise, leading to consensus. I'm certain that the same spirit will prevail in bridging the political and social differences here as well. I would like to end with a quote from our External Affairs Minister, Salman Khurshid, made during his stay here. Mature democracies have much to learn from young democracies. India can learn from the determination with which Tunisia has taken forward the process of democratic transition. and the spirit of compromise and consensus with which you have succeeded in adopting your constitution. End of quote. In other words, Tunisia, we are with you, holding your hand and also learning from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. As you all know, India is not only the largest democracy in the world, it is the country with the second largest Muslim population in the world. So it is very important for us to have a strong relationship with India and with the Muslim community in India, which, by the way, is very innovative in its thinking about democracy and about politics and Islam, and you have many, many excellent scholars in India. And I think we have two of them here with us in this conference from India. Finally, we have Ambassador, the newest ambassador, I think, in Tunis, who has just arrived, Ambassador Andreas Reineck from Germany. And as you all know, Germany has also been a very strong supporter of Tunisia during the last 3 years in our transition. So, Mr. Ambassador, welcome and thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Dr. Masmoudi, for having the courage to invite me, because I still count my presence in Tunisia in days. And normally I should sit down there and listen to what those who are much more experienced on Tunisia would say. So please forgive me if I'm not coming with a speech, but rather with some remarks and some thoughts which I have. And as I'm still a student of Tunisia, I would rather like to make a few remarks of what our own experience is and the experience in other countries, which I would like to share with you. My first remark goes a little bit to what my British colleague said, meaning what can we do as international community? And the first thing is sharing our own experience. This might not sound particularly exciting, but I think it is very important in also expressing the way I'm just doing it, sharing our experience. Because the experience of something which we were doing in Germany might perfectly well work in my country, but maybe not in Tunisia. It's still worthwhile looking at it and having a critical eye and ear and seeing what is done in Germany, what is done in France, what is done in India, and trying to see what exactly might work in Tunisia in a particular area. So my country tried to offer a few areas where we think, from our perspective, we can share some of our experience, but again with a view of offering you opportunities. One is water, how to provide more water in rural areas, how to provide clean water. I don't need to explain you why this is important. Again, whether our German system works in Tunisia, we don't know, but we can at least show you what we did, and maybe something like this or something else might work. Another issue is creating jobs, which is important for all of us. Our experience, I must say, is that jobs are not created by the state. Jobs are created by business. But how to do this? In Europe, we have one system. In Tunisia, we have another one. But in the end, jobs have to be there. And jobs have to be created by creating a system. Which is the right system for Tunisia? I don't know. I would be curious and fascinated to hear from you. So we can only offer our own experience. Renewable energy is another area. In my country, we don't have so much energy resources anymore. Coal is gone. There's a lot of water, luckily. Not so much sun, as you know. A lot of wind. So people, let's say, let's try this. Wind works beautifully on the North Sea. I'm not sure to what extent it works in Tunisia, but it shows an example where we can do something and provide energy without importing a lot of energy from outside. And how important this may be in the case of my country, you can see on the discussion on Ukraine right now, by the way, because we export a lot of energy from Russia. And other areas also in which we will work. So we can share this experience with you, but again, whether our experience is the right for you, this we don't know. And one of the areas where I would be curious to find out during my time in Tunisia, to which I'm looking forward very much, is to get a certain sense myself which one of our experience will work on which one will not. The second remark is a little more, even less complicated, let's put it this way. We can share our experience, but we cannot decide for you. And we know from politics back home that it is sometimes easy to have good expertise. You find a lot of experts who give you very good advices. Sometimes the one expert says you're this one, the next expert says the opposite. Which one is the right decision? Again, we don't know. But I think the responsibility of a politician also is to decide. And this is the experience which we have back home, and not only in my country, but in all European countries and other countries. There is a moment when one has to decide. And for those who are in a position like this, I can offer also another experience which is not very positive. Normally, people don't thank you for decisions. Normally, people don't thank you. People are always criticizing for decisions. But still, they have to be done. So we cannot decide, and we don't want to decide on your place, but we can just offer the experience and maybe consolations if someone says, oh, I took a decision and I got so heavily criticized. I think it's very important that also European and international politicians come and join those who have to decide and say, look, we are all in the same situation like you. It's not easy to decide. We were happy to provide you ideas, ways, and means, but the decisions have to be taken by the responsible people in each country. And the third remark applies to an issue which I believe and we believe is very important to democracy, that's communication. Communication, communication, communication. And communication works in two directions. Direction number one is we have to listen to what the people actually want and people actually need. If I'm looking back at the system back home on bigger projects to find out where waste disposal has to be, this place, that place, that place. Where is it needed? Is it better here? Is it better there? What are the concerns of the people? So one really has to be on the ground and to understand what people actually want. Because if you're sitting in a ministry, having a map in front of yourself, one is bound to take the wrong decision. So I think listening is the first important part of communication. I think this is the most important, which is in our own experience in Germany. We have listening to the people what we want. And believe me, and all those of you who are members of parliaments know that people are coming to you and telling you exactly, but I think the advice is listening. And the experience of us is listening to what people want. The second part of communication is obviously explaining decisions. Nobody will be happy, as I said before, with decisions. There's always people who are miscontent, but I think people are entitled to know why a certain decision has been taken. So I believe, and that's our experience, to explain through campaigns, through just arguments, to going to people to say why is a particular decision, has a particular decision been taken, and why the argument against had not been taken into account because other arguments were important. I think is extremely important. And our experience is that most people appreciate this. They know that the politicians cannot do miracles, but they want to know why. So I think these are three remarks from our own country, which I would just like to offer. They're not easy remarks because they make life not easy for decision makers, but I think that was our experience. Whether they work in Tunisia, I don't know. But again, this is what we have seen. So finally, let me say, democracy as we have experienced is not easy. Sometimes it's much easier to have a decision maker up there. So he decides and we can criticize it if it doesn't like it, if we don't like it. It's much more difficult to be responsible oneself, to be part of a decision-making process. But I think this is what in the end brings better decisions. That was our experience. And what I have learned in the few days I'm here in Tunisia is that there is a, for me, very impressive society, a leadership which is willing to decide, a leadership which has shown the art of compromise, working towards consensus. So I'm extremely confident that Tunisia will have a way into a better path. And if we, as an international community, can assist a little bit with providing our experience, we would be very happy and very honored. All the best for Tunisia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Reineck. I think we have heard from 5 of our best friends of Tunisia, who have really stood by Tunisia in this difficult transition period. We really thank them for their support. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions and answers because our distinguished ambassadors have other commitments and they must leave us soon. I really apologize. We wanted to have more time so we can interact with you, but hopefully we can do it again in the future. Again, thank you all very much for coming and for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We now have a 30-minute break, and then we have the next session at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much.